like the video, subscribe, and comment your country below so I know who's listening tonight. Turn off the lights and put on headphones for the full horror experience. Let's begin the nightmare. If you're brave enough. There was an old school at the edge of Mohnapur, a two-story building with broken windows and torn blackboards, rotting under a ceiling of bats and dust, but its abandonment was not because the structure had decayed. It was because no family in town wanted their children to walk its hallways after dark, for they believed the spirit of a murdered teacher still roamed its corridors, searching for students who never graduated, whispering their names like a roll call of the dead, and every parent in Mohnapur had heard at least one story about someone who stayed late and never came back home, though no one could prove whether those stories were exaggerated cautionary tales or something worse rooted in the truth of one night long ago when teacher Miss Arifa was found dead in her classroom. Chalk still in her hand, eyes open, body stiff, neck twisted as though something had grabbed her from behind and snapped it violently. But the rumors said she didn't die there, that she was dragged and displayed as a message, and the message was simple. No one leaves school before learning their final lesson, and that was why Mohnapur shut down the school, locked the gates, and built a new one across the river, hoping to bury memories under new paint, new teachers, and new children who wouldn't remember her name. Yet the old school still stood, tall and hollow, swallowing wind like breath, as if the building itself was not abandoned but waiting, always waiting, for someone foolish enough to walk inside again. And when a group of 4 friends, Arman, Farhan, Sana, and Zara, decided they wanted to film paranormal content for their YouTube channel, the old school became the perfect attraction, a place with local legend, decaying aesthetics, and the risk that could elevate their boring channel into something viral. Especially after Arman posted online saying they would spend a full night locked inside the haunted school and record everything that happened, and the post received thousands of shares, laughing emojis, death threats, and worst of all, comments from old teachers who warned them that Miss Arifa hates cameras, that she was always furious about phones in class, that she once slapped a student so hard their ears rang for days because they hid a phone under their desk, so if she sees a camera pointed at her face in death, she might just tear the eyes out of whoever holds it, and instead of frightening the group away. That warning made Arman even more excited. Because fear meant views, views meant money, and money meant success. So on a foggy Friday evening in December, they climbed through the broken gate, filming everything, laughing, swearing, pretending to be brave, while inside, the school looked frozen in time, desks scattered like bodies, textbooks torn and damp, chalk half erased on the board as though the teacher never finished writing, and in the third classroom on the right, they found it. A sentence written in faded red chalk, NO1. Leaves, and though Farhan joked that maybe someone wrote it for a prank, Sana pointed out that the handwriting looked too old, too shaky, as if written moments before death, and Zara, the only one sensitive to vibes, claimed they should leave before sunset because she felt watched, but Arman insisted they were safe, ghost stories were bullshit, and nothing in this world could touch you if you didn't believe in it. Yet the moment the sun began to vanish behind the trees, the school changed. The air grew thick, the hallways felt narrower, and the smell of chalk dust turned into something like rotting flowers, and Farhan whispered, "Why does it smell like graves?" But Arman ignored him, focused on the camera, narrating a fake spooky tone, pretending like someone was behind them while editing horror music in his head. But then they heard it, a faint sound like chalk scratching a board, slow, repetitive, dragging, writing something invisible, and instantly the friends froze, not because the sound was loud, but because it was so familiar, so ordinary, yet horribly out of place in a dead building where no teacher had taught for over 15 years, and when they followed the sound down the hall, they saw, on a blackboard that had been blank earlier, new words forming one letter at a time, as if an invisible hand was writing them. "Take your seats," and before any of them could react, the classroom door slammed shut with a violent bang, like a punishment, like anger, like authority, and Sana screamed, grabbing Zara's arm, but Arman kept the camera up, breathing fast, whispering, "Please tell me this is real, please tell me this is fucking real," because whether ghost or human, this was content, this was the moment that would make them famous. But the room had shifted, desks straightened themselves, chairs aligned, Chalk hovered near the board, drawing lines, circles, strokes like someone writing a lesson in cursive, and Farhan whispered, "We need to go, man, I don't like this." But Armin told him to shut up, sit down, follow the command. Because maybe if they acted like students, nothing would happen. But when the lights flickered, they all saw her. A silhouette materializing near the board, a tall woman with long hair covering her face, hands bent at unnatural angles, Chalk moving without touching her skin, writing faster, harder, carving the board. And when she turned her head slightly, showing a glimpse of her face, they saw teeth, cracked and yellow, as though she'd been chewing something too hard for too long, and Sana covered her mouth to stop herself from crying out loud. But the ghost paused, turned slowly toward them, and whispered without lips moving, "Phone away," and suddenly Zara's phone vibrated, as if punished, screen flickering, apps opening on their own, camera switching on, recording in reverse, filming their terrified faces with a distortion that made their eyes black and faces stretched like corpses underwater, and the ghost floated forward, legs not touching the ground, neck lolling side to side like it had been snapped and reattached incorrectly. And the closer she came, the colder the air grew, until breath formed clouds, and Armin spoke to her, voice shaking, introducing himself, telling her they were just students, new students, respectful students. But she didn't care about introductions. She wanted silence, attention, obedience, and when Farhan tried to stand and run, she appeared behind him instantly, teleporting with a violent snap of reality, slamming him into a desk, bone-cracking, breath-stealing, and the classroom door locked itself, windows blackened, lights flickered out, leaving only moonlight illuminating her face, pale, eyeless, mouth bruised, as though something had clawed at it from the inside, and she raised her arm, pointing at Armin, chalk dripping red like blood, writing a final command, "Stay," and in that moment, Armin understood the true horror. This wasn't a ghost reenacting old trauma. This was a teacher who still believed the night wasn't over, the class wasn't dismissed, and her students were not allowed to leave until she was satisfied, and that meant detention, punishment, death, or something far worse than death. Graduation into whatever realm she taught in now, where screams were homework, nights were exams, and the only final bell was the sound of a spine breaking. The classroom shook as if the building itself was reacting to her command, dust falling from the ceiling, tiles cracking under invisible pressure, while the ghost teacher stood impossibly still, head slightly tilted like she was evaluating them, grading them, and Armin, sweat dripping, eyes burning, couldn't help but notice that the board behind her no longer just held chalk marks, but was covered in shapes, symbols, circles, humanoid outlines with heads cut off, hands stretched, bodies tied to desks like lesson diagrams of dissection rather than education, and when she lifted her hand, the chalk snapped in half without being touched, and tiny fragments flew upward instead of downward, defying gravity as though the classroom had its own rules now, written by her and erased by no one, and Zara whispered, "She's not human." But Armin already knew, not because of her appearance, but because something deeper, an ancient authority, radiated from her, like she wasn't just a spirit, but something that existed on a level where human laws didn't apply, where obedience was survival and rebellion was death. And Sana clung to Farhan, who was still gasping from being slammed into the desk, clutching his ribs, tears streaming down his face, muttering, we need to go," but none of the doors would budge, the handles twisted like melted metal, the wood pulsing as though alive. And when Armin pointed the camera toward the board, the recording glitched violently, static, melting the screen, distorting colors, turning the ghost's figure into a series of multiplying silhouettes, dozens of her, layered over one another, flickering like bad animation, and all of them looking directly at him. All of them leaning forward, mouths opening wider than human anatomy allowed, a scream swelling, though no sound emerged, and that silence, that impossibly heavy silence, was somehow worse than noise because it felt intentional, weaponized, designed to suffocate, and the ghost raised her head slowly, revealing not emptiness where her eyes should be, but two deep white, cracked orbs, like chalk globes embedded in her skull, staring blindly yet fully seeing, assessing, and she whispered a word that sounded like breath scraping through broken pipes, "Attendance," and the lights violently sparked, creating a long flickering line of pale illumination across the ceiling, and suddenly desks all around them began moving, empty chairs pulling back, as though invisible students were sitting down, filling the room with unseen bodies whose presence bent the air, cold drafts moving between chairs, pages flipping on their own, pencils rolling, as though a whole class of dead children had returned for a night they never finished, and with every shift, every tiny movement, there was a faint echo of laughter, crying, whispering, all overlapping in a cacophony of memories trapped between life and death, and Farhan, eyes wide, whispered, "They died in here, she killed them." But Zara shook her head, insisting, "No, something killed them, and she tried to protect them," though she didn't sound convinced, because the ghost's posture did not look protective. It looked furious, deprived, abandoned, and when her fingers curled, tendons stretching like wires, nails sharpening to points, the ghost stepped forward and every invisible student turned their head toward Armin and his camera, as though they all recognized the device as a threat, as though cameras were the sin. That ruined them, and one of the unseen voices whispered, "Stop recording, or she'll break your hands," and Armin lowered the camera, fingers trembling, torn between survival and ambition, wanting viral fame but not mutilation, yet something deeper in him, ego, stubbornness, maybe stupidity, forced him to keep recording, even as fear paralyzed the others, because if he lived through this, he'd be unstoppable, famous, untouchable. But when the ghost heard the device hum, her neck snapped toward him with a rotten crack, body following milliseconds later, and she appeared inches from his face, breath cold enough to burn, smelling of damp soil and iron, and she said, in a voice layered with dozens of children's voices, "Learning requires sacrifice," and suddenly, every desk locked into position, metal hinges clamping down, trapping the invisible students in place, and the classroom door burst open by itself, revealing the hallway, long and hollow, but alive, wires dangling like vines. Windows shivering, lockers rattling, and somewhere distant, they heard footsteps, light, rapid, childlike, running, giggling, crying, and Armin whispered, "There are more," and Sana grabbed his arm, pleading, "Stop filming, let's go, please." But Armin didn't listen, so when he turned the camera toward the hallway, the ghost teacher vanished from his face and reappeared standing in the center of the hall, silhouette thrown into sharp relief by a sudden flash of unnatural white light, as though lightning had struck indoors, illuminating countless children behind her. Translucent figures with missing limbs, broken faces, empty sockets, all dressed in distorted uniforms stained with dirt, chalk, and blood, lining the hallway walls like a reception committee of the damned, and some were sitting cross-legged on the floor, rocking, whispering nursery rhymes with voices cracking and glitching like corrupted audio, while others stood perfectly still, heads bowed, hair covering their faces. And one small boy lifted his head slowly, revealing his jaw missing, tongue hanging loose, and he whispered, "We didn't pass," as though that was the only explanation needed for why they remained trapped, and the teacher turned slowly, arms stretched like a conductor ready to orchestrate a symphony of terror, and without any visible sign, all the classroom doors along the hallway slammed open simultaneously, revealing rooms filled with desks, all cleaned, aligned, ready, as though the school wasn't abandoned but prepared for a night of lessons, and the ghost said one word, low, guttural, and final, "In," commanding them to enter the hallway and choose a door, choose a class, choose a fate, and the walls pulsed, lights flickered red, air thickened like syrup, and something told them that refusing wasn't an option, that this wasn't an invitation, but an exam, and anyone who failed would never leave, would sit here forever. An invisible student attending a class that never ended, reciting lessons no one understood, overseen by a teacher who didn't teach anymore but punished, tortured, corrected, and kept everyone trapped in the eternal night of unfinished education. And Armin stepped forward, filming, whispering, "We're going viral for this," unaware that in every broken window reflection, his face was already changing, elongating, eyes hollowing, as though the school was preparing to make him one of its permanent students. The moment Armin stepped into the hallway, still recording, the door behind them slammed shut with such violent finality that Sana screamed and Farhan nearly fainted, and the air in the corridor grew heavy, humid, rancid with the stench of mold and old paper, as if the walls themselves were decaying, rotting from a century of grief, and the ghost teacher stood motionless at the far end, pointing her long chalk-white finger toward a door illuminated by flickering lights, a classroom with a crooked sign that read Room 13, and Zara hissed, "There is no Room 13 in this school." But Armin, trembling yet compelled by a force stronger than fear, approached it, because he remembered an urban legend about this building. A story of a hidden classroom that was sealed shut after a massacre, a room where students had been found seated neatly in their desks, eyes carved out, hands folded, as though waiting for grades. And as the group was pushed forward by invisible currents of air, they heard those unseen children marching alongside them, tapping feet, dragging broken limbs, whispering equations and fragments of poems, reciting things no living student would remember. And when Farhan tried to run the opposite direction, the hallway stretched like elastic, extending infinitely, trapping him in a loop, until he collapsed, sobbing, understanding that escape was not a route but a privilege, granted only by her. And the ghost teacher, without moving her legs, glided into the doorway of Room 13, phantom children passing through her like smoke, entering the classroom with silent obedience, and Armin whispered, "She wants us inside." But Sanaa grabbed him, nails digging into his arm, whispering, "She wants us dead," and Zara, voice shaky but calculating, said, "No, she wants us to learn," though that idea brought no comfort, because the school wasn't built for learning anymore. It was built for suffering, a machine powered by trauma, fueled by punishment, and as they entered Room 13, the odor of dried blood hit them, blended with chalk dust and burnt wood, and the desks stood in perfect formation, but not empty. Each held faint impressions, outlines of bodies burned into the wood, skeletal shadows like silhouettes left behind after an explosion, and above every desk hung a name tag, handwritten, faded, each with a date beside it, and some dates were normal but others were scratched violently, followed by red smears that looked disturbingly fresh, as though someone had been corrected recently. And at the front of the room was a massive blackboard covered in writing. Not chalk, but carved words, etched deep, thousands of sentences overlapping, all variations of the same message. "We failed. We failed. We failed," scratched over and over until the board looked ragged, battered, more weapon than tool, and the ghost teacher appeared behind the teacher's desk with a sudden jolt, her body snapping into form like a puppet, and she slammed her hand onto the wood, making every desk shake, and in a chorus of broken voices, unseen children whispered, "Test, test, test," their tones too calm, too practiced, as though trauma had been structured into curriculum. And the ghost teacher lifted a stack of papers from her desk, old yellow sheets dripping with dark stains, and began distributing them. Though she didn't walk, she flickered, teleporting between desks, placing exams in front of invisible students, and at last, in front of Armin, Zara, Sanaa, and Farhan, each receiving their own paper, cold and damp, smudged with fingerprints, claw marks, and something thicker than ink. And when Armin looked down, his exam wasn't blank. Scrawled across the top in jagged handwriting was the instruction. Write the truth about what you did. Though he didn't understand, he hadn't done anything, had he? But Zara gasped, recognizing the implication, because years ago, a student had gone missing after accusing teachers of abuse, and everyone pretended not to know, not to hear, not to help. And the official story claimed she ran away, but rumor said she died in this room, and her death had summoned something older than grief, something that took the identity of a teacher and converted the school into an endless detention, a torture chamber for cowards, liars, and silent witnesses. And when Farhan looked at his paper, his instructions said, "Write what you saw and ignored," and Sanaa said, "Write what you hid," and Zara said, "Write who you blamed," and Armin said, "Write who you filmed and humiliated." And suddenly the pieces connected. This ghost wasn't random. She hunted guilt, fed on denial, thrived on secrets, turning the building into a purgatory for everyone who pretended innocence to escape consequence. And when they failed to write, paralyzed by confusion, the desks began tightening around them, wood pressing against their ribs, legs, and wrists, squeezing until bone creaked, as though desks weren't just furniture but instruments of discipline, punishing non-compliance. And Armin, panicking, scribbled nonsense just to alleviate the Pressure, but the paper absorbed the ink, turning his words into black smoke that floated into the air, forming letters that read liar, hovering above his head, and the ghost teacher lunged forward with impossible speed, slamming his head into the desk, hissing, "And no more lies," while unseen children laughed, clapped, cheering, excited for punishment like spectators at a sport. And Farhan screamed that he didn't mean to ignore the victim, that he was scared, that everyone was scared, but the room swallowed his apology, converting it into gasps of mockery, voices whispering, "Too late," and Zara, shaking, confessed aloud that she blamed a dead girl to protect herself, that she lied to police, to parents, to friends, and Sanaa sobbed that she hid evidence, erased texts, because she didn't want her future destroyed, and Armin, dizzy, blood dripping, realized the children weren't haunting the teacher. The teacher was haunting them, holding them hostage, demanding justice through suffering, through forced introspection, through violent accountability, and when all four collapsed into tearful confessions, the room changed. Lights died, desks unlocked, whispers stopped, and for a moment, silence returned, heavy, suffocating, until the ghost teacher placed her hand on Armin's face, brushing hair from his eyes with emotion almost gentle, and whispered, "Class dismissed." But before relief could settle, the wall behind her cracked, splintered, exploded outward, revealing not a hallway but a massive chamber lined with desks suspended from the ceiling, bodies seated, hanging like grotesque puppets, dozens of corpses wearing school uniforms, heads tilted, jaws slack, and their eyes, empty sockets, dripped black sludge, and the unseen children whispered, full of hungry awe and dread, "Graduation," and Zara whispered, voice cracking, "We confessed, we did what she wanted, can we go now?" But the ghost teacher smiled a smile too wide, too broken, too ancient, and said with a voice filled with hundreds of dead students, not angry now, but hungry, triumphant, final, "But you have not taken the final exam." The classroom door slammed shut behind them, sealing Armin, Zara, Sanaa, and Farhan inside the cavernous chamber of hanging bodies, and though they were still breathing, every other presence in that room existed on the border of death, suspended in a purgatory that felt older than the school itself, and as they stared upward, they saw the corpses swaying as though an invisible wind passed through them, rattling their skeletal fingers, causing loose teeth to clack against each other like morbid applause, and the ghost teacher glided beneath them with unnatural grace, her eyes glowing with chalk dust white light, and she held a massive ancient grade book, bigger than any normal ledger, bound in decaying leather, stitched together with industrial wire and human hair, and she opened it, pages screaming like tortured throats, revealing names, not just names of students who died, but names of students still alive, names of teachers, parents, custodians, entire families tied to the schools. Legacy of suffering, thousands of signatures spanning decades, and beside each name was a mark, either pass or fail, though no one alive would know where they stood until their judgment day, and Farhan whispered, voice breaking, "How many died here?" And she answered not with words but by pressing her finger into the air, and the corpses above them blinked as one, releasing a tidal wave of flies that drowned the silence in buzzing chaos. And as Armin gagged, covering his mouth, Zara spotted something horrifying. Many bodies were wearing modern shoes, modern watches, brand-name backpacks, meaning these weren't relics from the past, but victims from recent years, whose disappearances were explained away with lies, dropped out, disciplinary transfer, suicide, family relocation, all convenient fictions shielding the school's spotless reputation from public scrutiny, and Sanaa muttered, "They cover it up every time," but the ghost teacher hissed, correcting her like a misbehaving student, and with a violent slash of her bony hand, she carved words into the nearest desk, wood screaming, the message reading, "The school does not cover it up. People do," emphasizing that humans, not ghosts, built the altar where children were sacrificed, because real cruelty was always human. Ghosts only inherited the wreckage, fed on the leftovers, and Zara remembered a rumor about the principal, the one who retired early, right before dozens of students vanished. Rumor said he ran away from something he unleashed, something he couldn't control, a ritual disguised as discipline, a tradition passed down. But Zara remembered overhearing teachers speaking in hushed tones, saying, "You don't talk about room 13," meaning they knew, accepted it, allowed it, because it was easier to pretend not to see than risk becoming the next body hanging from the ceiling, and Farhan collapsed to his knees, sobbing, "We didn't kill anyone. Why are we being punished?" And the ghost teacher looked down upon him with disappointment, raised her skeletal arm, and the dead children's voices screamed in unison, "Lies," rattling the bones of the building, and images rushed into their minds, memories forced into their skulls, visions of kids bullied, humiliated, recorded, rumors spread, lives destroyed, suicides blamed on mental issues, while perpetrators laughed, proud of the pain they caused, and Armin remembered recording a girl crying in the bathroom last year, mocking her for having drama queen issues, posting clips with laughing emojis, gaining thousands of views, only for her to disappear days later, and he had forgotten her name. But the ghost teacher whispered it into his ear with a breath colder than winter, forcing him to choke on guilt, and Sanaa remembered being friends with a girl who cut herself, promising not to tell anyone because she didn't want drama, even though the girl begged for help in her quiet, broken way, and one night bled out in her bedroom, and Sanaa had gone to school the next morning pretending nothing happened, wearing matching bracelets they made together, never mentioning her again, because acknowledging her death would make Sanaa part of the story, and Zara remembered a boy she manipulated, tricking him into sending photos, then spreading them to ruin him after a fight, and teachers covered it up because Zara was gifted, promising, prestigious, and the boy was found hanging from his belt in his closet, his parents blaming each other, never knowing the truth. And Farhan remembered beating a freshman nearly to death to impress his friends, leaving him permanently brain damaged, then telling people he fell. And now that boy sat at home with a mind frozen at age 6, eating cereal with his fingers, while Farhan lived freely, guilt buried beneath jokes and gym sessions, and the ghost teacher screamed, "All of you have blood on your hands," and the corpses above shook violently, shedding clumps of hair and teeth, raining them down like confetti of decay, and Amen fell to the ground, vomiting bile and tears, unable to deny any longer, because the ghosts were not here to punish innocent children. They were here to punish monsters disguised as students, and suddenly, a loud rumbling shook the chamber, and the walls split open, exposing hidden passageways leading deeper into the school, revealing hallways lined with old photographs, cracked glass frames displaying graduating classes from decades past, but every face was crossed out or scratched off, except one teacher, a woman with black hair in a tight bun, stern eyes, thin lips always centered in every photo, decade after decade, unchanged by time, a teacher who never aged, never smiled, always watching, and beneath each frame was a plaque reading, "Miss Sadaf Halim, Excellence in Discipline," and Farhan muttered, horrified, she was real, realizing she wasn't just a ghost. She was a woman who lived, taught, tortured generations, celebrated for academic rigor, and after her death, refused to stop, because ghosts do not change behavior, they repeat it forever, and the ghost teacher motioned them forward, pushing them into a hallway saturated with shadows, where the floor was sticky with dried tears and something thicker, and the deeper they went, the more memories returned. Not theirs, but memories belonging to the school's victims, projected violently into their minds, forcing them to experience beatings, humiliation, isolation. That endless detention where a teacher forced children to write lines until their fingers bled, punished every tear with a ruler, fed off fear like a starving animal, and when a child finally broke, mentally shattered, she called them a failure, and stripped their name from the gradebook, condemning them to hang forever like a warning, and suddenly, as they walked, footsteps echoed behind them, and dozens of ghost children materialized, marching in perfect formation, surrounding them, eyes hollow, lips sewn shut, bodies trembling. And one tiny girl stepped forward, her face cracked, jaw dangling, whispering in a broken voice, "She is not the worst thing here," before collapsing into dust, leaving that message etched into Armin's mind like a burning scar, because if she wasn't the worst, then what was? And as they reached the end of the corridor, they entered a vast underground auditorium with blood-red curtains drawn back, revealing a stage where a massive, pulsating, human-shaped mass was tied in iron restraints, made of hundreds of faces melted together, sobbing, screaming silently, its body stretching, twitching, growing with every memory of misery fed into it, and the ghost teacher pointed at it with reverent pride, whispering, "The principal, though this was no human anymore, but a beast constructed from decades of cruelty, an entity formed not by ghosts but by trauma, fed by silence, grown from neglect, worshipped by a system that valued reputation over lives," and Farhan backed away, shaking. "We confessed, we didn't want this," but the ghost teacher replied, "Your confessions feed him," and suddenly the beast opened its countless mouths, screaming a sound that shattered bone, and a chorus of children chanted, "Finals begin." As every exit sealed, lights died, and the auditorium erupted into a ritual of pain, promising no one would escape without paying the price, because this was not a haunting, it was a harvest. Night fell over the broken skeleton of St. Cecilia's like a curtain closing on a stage prepared for slaughter, the air heavy with the scent of wet chalk, ink, and something metallic that tasted like fear, and the handful of remaining students, Mira, Fahad, Omar, and Sanaa, stood together in the ruined courtyard, surrounded by abandoned desks and shattered textbooks that seemed to twitch faintly as if flicked by invisible fingers, while from the broken windows above them, a shape leaned out, tall, thin, hair hanging like drowned weeds, eyes burning with a lightless red, and they recognized, even through the distortion and rot, the face of Miss Sarwat, the teacher they once loved, now stretched and twisted by something ancient, wrong, and hungry, and the ghost hissed, not with hatred but with lonely desperation, calling their names one by one, promising safety, guidance, belonging, the old comfort of the classroom where she had been their mentor and protector. And as her voice echoed, they felt memories pressing into their skulls, the cane tapping, the chalk scratching, the lessons on obedience and silence, and behind those memories, another voice, something deeper, ancient, the entity that had claimed her. The broken spirit of the headmaster who had died a century ago, a tyrant who built the school as a prison for souls, feeding on fear, punishing those who failed, locking children in closets until their screams ended. And when Miss Sarwat arrived decades later, her kindness and protection made her a threat to his ritual, so he murdered her, hung her from the staircase, and bound her soul into endless servitude, turning the teacher into a puppet, a hunter, a collector of young minds, and so the hauntings began. Missing students, voices at night, bloody notes on desks saying stay after class, and now, with the school finally reopened due to budget desperation, the rituals awakened again, hungry, unfinished, and all the dead children trapped inside began whispering, pushing at the living world, begging to be freed before the headmaster's spirit sealed the gates forever and consumed every student who entered until the walls were full of their names, carved like trophies, and Miss Sarwat, caught between obedience and rebellion, stood on the rooftop, tearing her face, screaming soundlessly, her lips mouthing "Run before I become what he wants," but it was too late because the school groaned. The floors cracked open like ribs splitting, and chains of spectral chalk wrapped around the students' ankles, dragging them toward the entrance of the old basement, the detention hall, where rusty desks sat in rows like tombstones and the smell of burning flesh seeped from beneath the floor. And Fahad fought the hardest, kicking, screaming, refusing to go, but his scream died instantly as a cold hand rose from the dark and pulled him down by the throat, his body vanishing into black liquid that closed like cement, while the others watched helplessly as the floor mended itself, erasing the evidence, a perfect murder without even a sound of splashing. And that was when Mira realized the secret, that the school could not be fought physically because it was not a building, not a location, but a system, a ritual of control repeating forever, and the only way to kill it was to break the pattern, disobey, disrupt, defy, and she shouted to the others, "Don't run, ruin it!" So they tore desks apart, smashed windows, scribbled nonsense over the chalkboard, screamed, laughed, cursed, refused to follow instructions, and the building shook, sirens of anguish, children crying inside the walls, skulls rattling, and Miss Sarwat appeared again, screaming at them to stop, not because she wanted obedience, but because disobedience would free her too, and she feared what waited for her after release. But Omar, shaking, bleeding from bite marks on his legs, whispered to her, "You taught us to be brave," and struck the portrait of the headmaster with a broken desk leg, splintering the canvas open, and from it erupted a flood of black smoke and human teeth, swirling, screaming, forming a face with no skin, eyes like holes, voice made of orders, telling them to us, quiet, obey, and in that moment every desk, every paper, every light bulb vibrated violently and the building itself commanded them to kneel, but Mira, shaking with rage, screamed back, "Eno!" And something enormous broke. Windows exploded outward, clocks spun backward, a roar like a thousand children crying ripped through the walls, and all the spirits trapped inside, hundreds of them, poured from lockers, ceilings, and floors, ripping the headmaster apart piece by piece, while Miss Sarwat floated above them, finally free, eyes soft, face restored, and she whispered, "Thank you. I'm sorry," before she dissolved into white dust that drifted through the hall like falling snow, disappearing into peace, leaving only one last scream behind. A child, small, terrified, pointing toward Omar, who had begun to float uncontrollably, pulled upward by invisible strings, and before anyone could save him, he vanished, sucked into the dark of the ceiling, leaving nothing but his shoes on the tiles. And as Sana began sobbing and Mira pulled her up, the school trembled one final time. Walls collapsing inward, staircases crushing, flames bursting from pipes, and the two remaining students sprinted through the smoke-filled corridor, stumbling over bones, choking on dust, until they burst through the front doors just as the entire building fell in on itself with a sound like thunder swallowing a scream, sending a mushroom of ash into the sky, and then silence, absolute, cold, eternal, except for one quiet voice behind them, faint, polite, familiar, whispering, "Class dismissed." And when they turned, nobody was there, just the wind carrying scraps of burned paper across the playground, and written on one half-charred sheet in neat handwriting were 3 words that made Myra's skin crawl. New semester soon, and beneath it, in red ink that dripped like fresh blood, a list of names. Hers, Sana's, Fahad's, Omar's, and dozens more, blank spaces waiting to be filled, waiting for new students, new victims, new souls, as somewhere beneath the rubble, in the darkness of twisted corridors, a bell rang softly, calling the class to order, promising that St. Cecilia's School was never truly dead, only waiting for the next roll call, the next lesson, the next generation to enter its doors and never walk out again.